Okay, well, I'll get us going then. And hi, Aisha, it's nice to see you.
Hi, Dr. Danica.
And just to say, everybody calls me Danny, if anybody does want to say something later on. And I wanted to tell you about my first slide, because when I send this through to Mariette, I've got another slide after this, which is also an introductory slide. And she said, why have you got two? Can't you just go with one? And the story behind my slide is that when I started putting this together, I was like, oh, look how cute. I can use a little turtle. It looks so pretty. And then later on, as I started making the talk, I was like, actually, this is not such a nice topic to talk about. It made me very sad. And I probably should have started with something like this. So what I'll be telling you about today is where we are in terms of data that we have on lost fishing gear in South Africa. I've named it Ghosts in Africa Seas because it is about ghost gear, and I will tell you about that. But let me first start basically where I'm from. So I work for a nonprofit called Sustainable Seas Trust. We basically work in education, research, and communication about marine plastics. We do a lot of community work, we do cleanups, and we do, as I said, research in a wide variety of projects, and one of them is the one I'll be telling you about tonight. And it's all part of what we call the African Marine Waste Network. So we have a lot of partners all across Africa, well, globally also, but mostly Africa, because our main focus is Africa. So I'll start telling you about the negative impacts of plastic, and you'll probably wonder, why am I telling you about plastic when you're supposed to be talking about fishing gear? Well, it's because most fishing gear is actually made from plastic, and it is also the discarded fishing gear is also the biggest amount or largest form of macroplastic we find in the seas. And it makes up to about 70% of plastic by weight in the sea. And I've got a picture here of, well, different kinds of nets. They're all made from different kinds of plastics. And we were sent this by Plastics. We've got some colleagues there. And this is the wall of fame and shame. It's really just to show that the nets are made from so many varieties. And what's really difficult about this is that it means we can't, not that we can't, but we really struggle to recycle fishing nets because they're made from so many different things. So because, like I said, nets are made from plastic, I'm going to talk you through plastics and their impact on the environment. And so plastics can, when they break down into smaller particles, especially, they can absorb pollutants such as heavy metals. They can also release harmful chemicals. Obviously, you would all know about ingestion. So the smaller the particle gets, the more likely something small will ingest it. Entanglement is very common in South Africa. It's issues we have, not with just sharks, but of course whales. But they're also vectors for invasive species. So because plastic lasts so long in the environment, it can float around in the ocean for tens, maybe even hundreds of years. And while it's doing that, it's obviously being, it's a platform for organisms to grow on. And so that's how they spread throughout the world. And so now I've told you about plastic, but basically all of this also applies then to fishing gear. And just to give you some statistics, and also just so you know background with the plastics is, well, how much of plastic is there in the sea? So the stats tell us it's about 8 million metric tons that enter the ocean annually. And if you can't picture how much that is, it's basically 2 million African elephants. And that's why the elephant is there. And you could also say with an ox, basically every 3 seconds, an ox will enter the ocean. So it is frightening statistics. It's obviously estimates, none of this is 100%, but this is what we're getting from the most recent research. If we're looking at microplastics, which are really microscopic pieces of plastic, we are now finding them in about 55% of the fish species we eat. And by 2050, it seems that there will be more plastics in the sea than fish by weight. So the statistics are pretty scary. And so now I'll just tell you how marine litter is sort of divided up. So when we're talking about marine litter, we say it's either from land-based or sea-based sources. I've got the 80-20% there. It's because generally we say that 80% of marine litter comes from the land and 20% from the sea. but the statistic is actually recently been refuted. But up until now, this is the statistic that everyone was working with. But we're looking at sea-based sources of waste in this talk, and the most important ones for sea-based sources are shipping, aquaculture, fishing, and others. So your others would be things like oil rigs, even scientific equipment, for example, could be others. And so I'm just making sure that there's a differentiation between shipping and fishing, in that shipping doesn't include fishing boats. Okay, so that's kind of the difference, which does confuse a lot of people. But shipping can be your shipwrecks, your cruise liners, containers, and it's not just, this isn't just for plastic, this is for all litter that comes from ships. And then of course, fishing then contributes about 10% to those sea-based sources of waste, and it includes commercial fishing, recreational, and artisanal fishing. And so I wanted to play a game. We often do this in some of our workshops, and it's fun. Just put a thumbs up or thumbs down, whatever you want to do, but I'll talk through it anyway, but I'll be keen to see your reactions. So we want to know, does this belong in the ocean? So this one's pretty obvious. And I would say, yes, this belongs in the ocean. Thank you, Ruan. Does this belong in the ocean? Yes, pretty easy again. Thanks. Thanks, Aisha. Does this belong in the ocean? Yeah. Okay. Yes, but maybe no, and I'll get to that. How about this? Does this belong in the ocean? It does. It can. But if it becomes ghost gear or abandoned gear, then it shouldn't be in the ocean. And then this is always a funny one. A lot of children will often say, yes, this belongs in the ocean. It's a boat. Well, actually, a boat that's been left at the bottom of the ocean shouldn't really be there. But in this picture, you can see it's actually becoming almost being used by the fish, and it's growing coral on it. So kind of debatable whether this should or shouldn't be in the ocean. So now let's start with ghost gear. Ghost gear is basically any gear that a person has lost control of and that's left in the ocean to continue fishing marine organisms. Another name for ghost gear is often abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear. And so, nets and gear gets lost or discarded for various reasons. So often a fisherman will abandon something, so he no longer has control over it, and he's also not able to retrieve it. So it could be because it's snagged at the bottom of the ocean and it's now going to be a safety concern to try and get the fish, to try and get the net up. So that's abandoned gear. Lost gear is when the fisherman he's got no control and he's got no idea where it is, and he's not going to look for it. It's gone. And then discarded fishing gear is basically when somebody has purposefully left it there. So they had control over it, but they left it and they have no intentions of getting it back. So that's the difference between abandoned, lost, and discarded. And so I'll just give you an idea of how something becomes a ghost net. So when a net is snagged or is left on purpose, it will, either fall right to the bottom of the ocean, and in which case it will smother the organisms that are living there, the corals, or it will get entangled. So often if it's a whale, it will get caught up in it. Unfortunately, most probably die. As it dies, it then goes to the bottom of the ocean. But as it starts decomposing, obviously there's nothing to keep the net weighted down, and so the net starts floating up to the top again. And then this whole cycle starts over and over again. However, if you notice in this picture, we can actually break the cycle. Okay, so human beings are able to, if we're good and we can find the nets, we're able to take them out and the cycle is broken. And so what kinds of gears can become ghost gear? Well, any of these. So you've got your fishing line, your traps. There in the middle is your gill nets. Those are the worst sort of gear you could find. And various ropes and buoys. So any gear really that's been left in the ocean can become ghost gear. And remember, while it's, we're thinking entanglement and smothering of the ocean, but while it's doing that, it's also releasing all these harmful chemicals or picking up invasive species. So it isn't just that it's entanglement and a whale dies. There's so much more harm being done than just a whale being entangled. And so globally, there's different rates of how gear gets lost. So normally about 5% of your ropes will get lost on a global scale now, about 8.6% of your traps, and mostly about 30% is the fishing line. So those are the worst, and they do get lost often. A lot of this is actually recreational fishing that contributes to that. And so Huntington did a table where we wanted to know, well, what is the likelihood of something becoming a ghost gear or ALDFG, and what is its potential impact? And then what is the risk then of this gear harming the environment? And gill nets definitely come out on top. So gill nets are very likely to become ALDFG, and they've got a terrible impact. Obviously, any kind of fish can get entangled and smothered. So they are the worst that you could think of. It's not changing yet. There you go. So gill nets can be put kilometers out at the bottom of the ocean or in the middle of the ocean. And I'll go more into this just now, but they are the worst that can happen. Then your traps, different kinds of traps for lobsters and crabs and so on. And these have a fairly high likelihood of becoming ALDFG, but yeah, also pretty bad impact. Fish aggregating devices. I think most people won't know what this is. So basically a fish aggregating device is something that floats on top of the water. It's attached to a buoy, which may or may not be anchored to the bottom of the ocean, and it floats. So it's like it could be, you know, if it's a recreational fisherman or an artisanal fisherman, it could just be a box of wood or something that's floating around, and it attracts the fish. So the fish are attracted to it, but it is quite likely to become ALDFG because the boat that would release it isn't always near it. So it's very easy for these things to get lost. Hooks and lines, I'm not going to go into pictures there. Your bottom trawl, so it doesn't often get lost, or the likelihood of it becoming ALDFGs is not so big. And I'm not certain that I agree that its impact is only a number 3. I probably would have put it at a number 4, but that is debatable. Bottom trawls obviously not only take out a lot of fish, but while they're being pulled along the ocean floor, everything, the coral, the fish, everything that's there, the sediment just gets completely, smashed. And so they're really not great, but they don't get lost very often. Midwater trawl, similar to that. These ones they also don't have a huge impact because they're kind of just floating in the water. So they're not dragged at the bottom of the ocean. And then your seine nets, very little impact and very unlikely to get lost. So like a commercial seine net, something like this could cost up to 100,000 Rand. So, the fishermen wouldn't want to lose this. It's a very expensive piece of equipment. So they will always try and get it back if they can. So I just wanted to get back into gill nets because they are the worst kind of net, got the worst impacts and so on. So gill nets can be drifting, okay, where they're sort of floating in the ocean and the boat is pulling it along, and they can be kilometers long, or they can be set gill nets, in which case they're anchored to the bottom of the ocean, and then at the top you will have a little flag so the boat can see where the net is. And then you can see in the picture there that there's a fish that's being caught, and there's a group of divers that are trying to get it out. The problem obviously with gill nets is that they can catch different kinds of fish. And then just some examples of the kind of stuff that can get caught. So any kind of organism, including birds, because gill nets are technically, you can't see them. So as they're being pulled out of the water, a bird will often fly into it and get tangled. But there is some good news about gill nets. So some way that people are trying to reduce the bycatch, so that's basically where you capture things you don't want to have in your net. They are now putting LED lights, which are basically trying to prevent the, entanglement, because certain animals can see this. So like your squid are able to see this, and so on. They've also got pingers. So pingers is like a sound device that lets out some sound waves. And then things like your whales, so your cetaceans, so whales and dolphins, they will be sort of repelled from it. Also, you can put some links or weak links into the net so that should something get entangled, it can break away. And also with gill nets, what globally we're now starting to do is that you can only use them at a certain time of the year and in a certain area of the ocean. So that's gill nets. There is legislation for all of this. I think a lot of you would have heard about MARPOL, which very loosely is actually a very long name. It's the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. So I think the MARPOL is actually just marine pollution. That would have been easier to say. But basically, it's legislation that is meant to prevent more pollution entering the environment. Annex 5 of this piece of legislation is the one that particularly talks about plastic. So even though it may not talk about fishing gear, because fishing gear is made from plastic, it applies to fishing gear. And there are 37 African countries that have signed MARPOL, basically meaning that they should be adhering to the rules that are in place with this. And I just, in this picture you've got there on the right, so one way that people are implementing MARPOL is that they've got these bins on their ships. So this is a picture from Port Elizabeth Harbour. And we went to have a look at some of the fishermen. We spoke to them, and they all have to have bins, and they have bins for recycled material and non-recycled material. So it's a small step in the right direction. Okay, so how much of this stuff is actually out there? We actually don't know. We don't know how much is out there. There's big estimates. That 80-20 principle, I told you, that's an estimate. The 10% of that is an estimate. And so what we're getting is that anywhere between 1,350 tons to 640,000 tons in the ocean. Okay, so it's very difficult to know where this is, because obviously a lot of this sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And so mostly the kind of things we could do is ask fishermen to be honest and say, yes, I've lost my net. And then we can start finding out how much of it is actually out there. Like I said, nets are very strong and durable. The whole purpose for a net is that they have to last in the sand. They have to be dragged in the sand. They get exposed to sunlight, salty water. So they have to be durable. But because they're so durable, it means they last for a very long time. And so a lot of the things I already mentioned about plastics is the same for fishing gear, entanglement, ghost fishing. So they continue to fish even, without any control of a person. They transport invasive species. There's that crate. You can see all those little barnacles that are on there. They're obviously very harmful to benthic community. So the stuff at the bottom of the ocean, they can damage equipment. So if ropes get entangled in a ship's rudder, it can be quite bad. So I think nobody really wants the stuff in the sea. Everybody would rather have it somewhere else. And obviously there's huge economic losses because it's direct competition with fishermen. Okay, these ghost gears are fishing basically. And so the statistics is that there's been a 30% decline in fishing stocks in the last sort of 30 years because of ghost fishing. So now I want to get onto sea-based sources of waste in general. So I'm not talking just fishing gear, but sea-based sources. There's so little information of this. You can see on the map, there's hardly anything for Africa. Most of it is in the Northern Hemisphere. And even that isn't enough to tell us exactly what's happening. And so the GSEMP working group put together this book to try and get us to understand what the situation is. But really, the point here is that there's so little data for Africa. And if we don't have the data, we don't know how to mitigate what we're trying to get rid of. So just to give you an idea, in South Africa, we have, I counted this earlier, I think about 16. We've got 16 commercial fisheries. Obviously, all of them using different kinds of gear, so it's different kinds of plastic, again, making it quite difficult to recycle, should it be recycled. And then you see most of the ones like your pelagic per se, your demersal trawls, and your midwater trawls. So all the ones that are the biggest contributors to our amounts of fish are also the ones that use nets. And we saw earlier that nets are pretty detrimental. So what are we doing about this? We have started putting some data together in South Africa, and we've started here in Port Elizabeth or Gqeberha. So we started doing baselines. We're starting to collect data. In the map there, this is all the work we're doing in PE as a SST as a whole. But if you look at the red dots, that's where we've got sites where we are monitoring litter. So we're walking along the beach and picking up every bit of fishing gear that we can find. And we then take it back to the lab. We weigh it, we count it to try and give us an idea of what's actually out there. And then we're also using fishing line bins. So we've put up these bins. I'll show you a picture just now at these sites that you see there. And that's also one way to track whether fishermen are using the bins, and if the bins are getting used more, does that mean there's less fishing gear on the ground? And that's really what we're hoping to happen. So we've started a data collectors network. We do workshops on how to use our data sheets for other people. And basically we run through this to teach them what we need out of the information. And we've done, like I said, workshops. They get a certificate at the end of it. It's all voluntary. So we've had a lot of people, you see examples here, we've had a lot of organizations, individuals that send us this data because we obviously can't work along the whole of South African coasts. But with all of the help we're getting, we are getting a very good amount of information all along the coast of South Africa. So very, very grateful for all the people who help with this. And so here are just some pictures from what we have found so far. Like I said, this is just from Port Elizabeth. Mostly, again, you'll see it's ropes, okay? These ropes are very, very heavy. I didn't realize how heavy they were until I tried to pick up that blue one on the right-hand corner. It's next to impossible to pick up. You would actually need a machine to do it. Possibly why it's always just left there, because a single person can't do anything about it. And here you'll see we've got Toshka, Taylor, and Sean, and these are all SST people who help with this work. And then the shark that you see there, that was unfortunately caught here in Port Elizabeth. So like I said, we're also using fishing line bins. So this is what they are. They're basically a plastic pipe that's got an opening at the top, it's closed at the bottom, and the hope is that the fishermen will, instead of leaving their stuff on the ground or throwing it into the sea, they would come and put it into the bin. So we try to put it as close as possible to where the fishermen are fishing so that they don't have to walk with all their rubbish. And then we put that in and we monitor what is in these bins once a week. And there you've got one of our research interns, Makosi, who's doing this work with us. So she's trying to put some litter in there, or I should say fishing gear. So what are the things we have been finding so far? If we look at just the sampling that we do from the coast, your ALDFG, we've gone once a week since August. Okay, so not very long, it's only a couple of months. We have 8 sites where we walk 100-meter stretches. And in that very, very little time, we've already got over 1,000 kilograms of fishing gear from technically 800 meters of beach in Port Elizabeth. So that's astounding. Also, again, fishing line is a big culprit, and then things like ropes and steel traces. So that's from the surveys we do along the coast. Then when we're using the fishing line bins, again, we look at these once a week. We go out there, we check what's inside. This has only been going on since September. We've got 10 bins along the coast, and we've got about 500 grams that we have found in those. So it's a start of getting our data together. And like I said, the data collectors also give us data, and this is something we're putting together into a big database so that we have a better idea once we start analyzing it, what the situation is. So just to talk you through the project then. So the idea is that now we do a proof of study. So we've started doing it. The work we're doing now, it's just the start so that we can establish baselines. So I think after about another 4 months of collecting, it will be safe to say what the baseline is. We've got enough data to know what a baseline is. And the idea is really to develop recommendations for fishermen, for your managers, whoever sort of is involved in the fishing community, on what they could do to mitigate ALDFG. And then once we've got that established here in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, we'd also then want to roll it out to the rest of Africa. And I might have said this already, but we have a lot of collaborators. This project requires a lot of help. We cannot do it alone. And so here are some of the people we're working with. It's astounding how helpful people have been. And yeah, I'm very, very grateful for these people because they are helping South Africa find out what the status of fishing gear is in our country. And I think, yes, so we've come to the end. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dani. And I agree with Ruan is that measuring the problem is usually the first step. and like you said, you're 4 months away. I know I definitely want to know, how do I, and maybe Ruan as well, or as a team, how do we get on board? How do we become data collectors? Is it on your website, or can
It is on our
individuals do
website.
it?
Individuals, definitely individuals, because it will be you going on the beach.
Yeah.
So you can email me, or you can just email info@sstafrica.org.za, and we'll put you through to the right person. So you'll be working with Taylor, who was in some of those photos there, and obviously me as well. And then we can show you how to use the data sheets. And we would love it if we got more people to help, because the more data, the better our stats can be, you know. So yeah, I'm going to hold you to that.
No, I am definitely. But then I also want to know, in those,
she'll do it. I promise you that she'll do it.
Okay, good. Yay.
Those pipe bins that you have there. So is that also like, once you've collected all the data, is that then the next step? Is it going to go around the whole, maybe South Africa first, and then the whole coast of Africa?
So there's actually lots of them already in South Africa. It started off with the Diet Trust Conservation Trust, sorry. And they started in Cape Town with something like 20 bins, and there's over 200 of these bins now just in the Cape area. So we're hoping to obviously spread this across the whole coast, and we have just started here in PE. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll keep that in mind. I'll have a look out for it the next time I'm at the beach.
Good, yes.
Okay, I'm supposed to be looking at questions. Okay, I'll continue with my question after I've asked the audience, because that's my real job, yeah. Ruan, I can't see.
Marty was first, and then Dr. Taylor.
Okay.
I just pipped Llewellyn at the post there. Thanks, Danny, for the for the interesting talk. I appreciate that collecting stuff off the beach and whatever is important, but what percentage of the stuff that is abandoned actually gets to the beach? I mean, surely most of it is in the deep water, and that's the biggest problem. So how do you, I mean, I'm not saying don't do what you're doing, but how do you actually get the stuff that's in the deep water? And is there any way of holding the people responsible? I suppose there's no like way to track who dropped it there or anything. Is there any sort of penalties or any way to almost say that fishing boats have to have trackers or identification on their nets from the beginning, otherwise they're not even allowed out? Or you know, like some sort of permanent marking on the net that you can track who it came from?
So gear marking is quite common in Europe now. It's become almost, well, I think it is legislated there. So exactly for that reason, so that if somebody finds an abandoned net, not only is it just to say, oh, you dropped your net and it's bad, come and get it. It's also to let the people know, come and get your very expensive net. So there's two things why you would want people to know what or who a net belongs to. We don't have that system in South Africa yet. What we have started doing is that the fishermen or the guys on the boat should technically have a logbook to say what they've got on the boat, and then when they come back, somebody should check that it's still there. I don't necessarily think that's always being done, but certainly the fishermen that we spoke to, or the managers we spoke to, they were pretty good about them. We spoke to a squid fisheries manager, and he says they're pretty good about it, just because they want to help the situation. So yes, gear tracking. Obviously, definitely what you said is right. Most of the stuff is still at the bottom of the ocean, and there is no way to get it unless the fishermen themselves are honest and say it's there. So it does become an honesty system. But how do you track it in the middle of the ocean, you know?
I mean, I know with a lot of the bird things, they actually have spotters or observers on board that are almost regulated for. If you're going on a trip, you have to have XYZ number of spotters, and their job is literally to make sure that you're behaving yourself the whole time that you're out there. Is that something that actually enforced in South Africa? And
yes, so we do have spotters, but they're not really there to check that the gear is still okay. They're more there to check that you're catching the correct species of fish, or the fish are the right size. But one of our ideas, and we haven't really put it into action yet, but it was to get hold of these observers and just to see, while you're doing what you're doing, could you also keep track of if gear is being lost? But I think that it will become, or it is difficult, because obviously then the fishermen aren't going to want them on the boat. So already they're not so keen to have them on their boat. Now it's going to be a double whammy. Not only are they checking what fish are being caught, they're not checking if I've got my gear with me. So I think it will be tricky, but that would be a very easy way to know what's going on.
I mean, I would have thought in terms of issuing permits and licenses and that sort of thing, it becomes the rule. If you don't have the person on board, you can't go.
Yeah,
but
it isn't, unfortunately.
I speak from an idealistic world, not involved in these material things. Thank you.
But if I may, Dr. Taylor, I'll read with you now, just to add to that comment. In the filming industry, if I want to film on any beach or anywhere where nature is involved, I am not allowed to film there without what we call an ECO, an environmental officer, and we have to pay for that person. It's part of the permitting fees. If we don't have an ECO on set, we get hefty fines for filming on any beach, on any dune, on any mountain. That's it within the Western Cape. I'm not sure about the rest of the of the South African coastline, but in the Western Cape, it's definitely enforced. And the city of Cape Town just does not give you, or South African National Parks just does not give you a filming permit if you do not have an ECO on site. So it's not as idealistic as you would think it is. It's possible. If we can do it in the filming industry, then it's possible anywhere else.
Yeah, it's definitely possible, but I think it's just, the fishing industry has a lot of say. And so that's also one of the reasons why we try to work with the commercial fisheries, because we don't want this to become a us and them kind of thing. That's not what it's supposed to be like. Yeah.
The last point I just wanted to make is I think then it's also difficult if international guys aren't subjected to the same rules, because I think a lot of these foreign fishing guys come in, they're illegal already in our waters and all kinds of things. Yeah. And our guys might be behaving themselves and, obeying the rules. But at the end of the day, that's how much it goes to the cost per kilogram of fish that they're trying to sell. Yeah. And if the international guys aren't penalized in the same way, then they can't be competitive. So it's a tough thing. Thanks.
Yeah, I have a thought and a question. The question first, you say 37 countries are signatories to the efforts, but what proportion of African countries with a coastline is that? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, are there landlocked countries signatories as well?
Okay, so I don't have the numbers on hand, but there will be some landlocked, because fishing here, it's not just in the ocean, it's also found in the lakes. So a lot of the Great Lakes in Africa have the same issue. And so you will have some countries who would have signed the MARPOL, even though they don't have a coastline. I can't offhand think how many coastal countries we have in Africa. Maybe someone in the audience knows. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
And then the thought I have then too is, with landlocks and so forth in Africa, have we any idea to what extent we have a problem with gill nets, for example, and so forth in landlocked areas?
Yeah, so while I was putting this together, I came across a lot of gill net or illegal gill net fishermen apparently is a problem in St. Lucia. A lot of our estuaries have that problem, because obviously the estuaries are breeding ground for all fish, so they should be conserved. But I don't think there's a lot of a lot of people going out to check that it's not being done. So I do know it's a problem, but how big a problem, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Llewellyn. I got kicked out for a bit, but I'm pretty sure I saw Prof. Liesel's hand was up.
It was up, you're right. There we go.
Yes, I am, Danica, thank you for the talk. I'm curious to know, some of the stats obviously now focused on data that was collected from the coastline. What effort is being made for the holiday fishermen that comes down to make them more sensitive about not leaving the gear on the coast? Because I'm sure if you have the polls taken after the December and January holiday, that stats might be a little bit higher.
Yeah, look, we're going to try and keep them there during the holidays, because you're exactly right. Part of the work at SST is that we try and raise awareness about the problems. So a lot of our work would be to approach fishermen. Like I said, we have done workshops with commercial fisheries, but recreational fisheries also probably would need to get, we need to just get the word out that you shouldn't be leaving your bits of line lying around. I think a lot of the time the fishermen don't realize how much it actually adds up. So your little bit here and there, you might think it's nothing, but it actually really does add up. And yeah, part of this project is to raise awareness. So we'll be having a workshop later on in the year, or in fact, early next year, I should say, on best practices. So we're going to try and get people from all over Africa to come and discuss the issues for Africa so that we've got a solution that's sort of locally based. But yeah, I think the holidays are going to be a big issue, and I'm going to be very curious to see what's in our fishing lines, or fishing line bins, I should say.
Good question.
Thank you. And thank you, Prof. And then I just want to ask something quickly. What happens to the litter collected in those plastic little bins? Yeah.
What happens to it? Well, we take it. So at the bottom of it, you can unscrew. So you unscrew the bottom, we take it back to the lab, we analyze it so that I can have the data I showed you. And then we obviously dispose of it properly. So we'll take it to a proper legal dump site. Look, there is a lot of sort of word now, or possibilities to recycle gear. The issue a lot of the time with gear is that because it's been out in the sea for so long, it's dirty, and you can't really recycle dirty gear. So it's like, at what point do the fishermen give it to you? Because they're not going to want to give it to you when it's still nice and clean, but you can't really recycle it if it's too dirty. So yeah, it's a balance.
Yeah. Catch 22, like literally and figuratively. Andy Clee, I'm going to ask. John, please.
Oh, hi. Yeah, sorry. It was related to how we dispose of this stuff when it's recovered, especially the big nets. I don't think there's a solution. This stuff's toxic, and it's, it never goes away, plastic. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, you say illegal dump. Presumably that's, at least it's out of the ocean and not doing what it's doing. And we hope that someday we'll find a way of dealing with this stuff, because from what I've seen in my research and bits and pieces on this, there is no solution to this stuff. And saying, oh, it degrades in a couple of 100 years or whatever, you're just degrading into toxic nanoparticles that through. So sorry, it wasn't much of a question, but you kind of answered it beforehand. But thanks for the talk and the work you're doing. It's incredibly important. So thank you.
Yeah, I did want to say on that that there are companies who do recycle gear. Fishing nets in the Western Cape are often used to make soccer goalposts. Like do you know the net on the goalpost? So they're using it for that. Obviously, across the globe, you can now buy things that are supposedly from recycled fishing gear, but how much of the stuff is actually from recycled fishing gear, I don't know. But there are companies in Europe who are recycling it, so they're specializing on it, like that plastics, where I showed you that wall of fame and shame. They specifically work with fishermen. So there is that. And also we are trying to, well, not SST, but there is obviously research going into biodegradable plastics. I don't have enough knowledge about biodegradable and whether that's the right solution, but that is something that is, being done. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Andy. And then there's in the chat, Rowan, because I got kicked out, I might have missed a few things because it's cleared. But then there's one from Mareka. That's the one that I'm here. It says it will be great if the fishing service already on commercial fishing vessels can act as fishing gear service as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's definitely something we've spoken about. Haven't quite got to actually implementing any of it, but I suspect we're going to have a bit of resistance.
The observers that's on board, are they trained commercial companies, or are they, are more in the green sector?
They're often actually students, people who are looking for part-time work. One of the people who works with us, his name is Safiso, he was an observer. Yeah, I mean, they get trained, obviously, but they're there just to check that the right fish species is being caught in the right size. And they do record it. So, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's the kind of job a person would want to do forever. I don't think it pays very well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and that's based on honesty. A lot of it is based on honesty.
Well, exactly. And I mean, I've many of you might have read, there was a book called The Outlaw Sea. And there, the observers often threatened, like their lives were threatened. So it's not a nice thing to do. You could get yourself into trouble, and because you're supposed to be honest, but if somebody's threatening your life, I don't think you will be. So,
yeah, that's I think maybe not even just with what is getting taken out, with thrown in, but also taken out sometimes.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot gets caught in those nets that's not written.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then a nice, let's see, Dr. saying thank you, well done. Incredibly important work, a massive challenge to. And Edom is saying thanks, Danny, for very interesting talk.
Thank you.
And then if Ruan can read the rest, mine got cleared, but I know there were a lot of thank yous.
But I was just thinking out loud, if there's anyone in the Cape Town area, or actually the Western Cape area, you had their logo on, and we've been working with them for quite some time. With the Beach Co-op is a wonderful,
yes, they are.
And they do really great stuff. It's not only beach cleanups they do, but all the garbage is collected and it's studied by a professor, and I forgot his name completely.
Peter Ryan?
Yes, Peter Ryan. Peter Ryan from the Fitzpatrick. And they do incredible work, I mean, which is added to all your stuff and your data. So if you are in Cape Town, go Beach Co-op, beach-co-op, and just go and join a beach cleanup. It's nice, it's fun, and it's you help in a little way, in a little bit. Maury?
Yeah, you were talking about freshwater nets. That's also a problem in rivers and things like that. And just a sort of sad story that I've heard as well, with all the mosquito nets that were being distributed to try and prevent malaria, then a lot of them were actually being now used for fishing. And I'm pretty sure those weren't even made for fishing. So they probably also disintegrate and do even worse. I think the holes are even much smaller than gill nets. So it's just an observation. That's another thing that's a problem. And then there was a talk you mentioned, Peter Ryan. I think it was either on Rangers or Conservation Conversations. He gave a talk on a very similar topic. So I'll try and find that link and share it.
That'd be great. Thanks. Yeah, no, we work very closely with Peter Ryan. He's a collaborator, advisor. Yeah, we work very closely with him.
Thanks.
Maret, Marty, thank you for sharing that. Maret just shared in the chat section the talk that Peter Ryan gave on unlocking nature. We had him here as well. So the talks there. Got to go. Cheers, Annie. It's lovely to have you. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Let's see if there's any other questions in the audience. Any comments what anyone wants to make? Say thank you. Danny, do you want to say something else? Yuan, well, you can unmute yourself, so there you go.
Thanks, Ron. Danny, I would like to ask, we are all land-based consumers. Are there any particular products that you notice that are particularly contributing to plastic pollution in the ocean that we can avoid, or that we can perhaps put pressure on the corporates that we all support?
Yes, definitely. So plastic bottles, obviously, we find a lot of those, and also polystyrene. We've also, interestingly, finding quite a lot of plastic bottles that have foreign labeling on it, so we know it's from foreign ships. So it's not stuff that we would have thrown on the beach and it got swept out. It's definitely from ships and from foreign countries. I wish I had my diagram here, because we've actually published a paper on the stuff we've done in PE where we monitor litter along beaches. And there we obviously categorize it. So if you've got that paper, I can send it to you later. There it will break it down as to what we're finding, especially in sort of Algoa Bay, obviously. But there's a lot of literature on that. Yeah, I think plastic bottles and, like I said, the polystyrene. I'm thinking plastic now because that's the line of work I'm in. But, you know, there's lots of other things that people throw out. I think they don't realize they shouldn't be throwing out. Yeah.
I remember when we did Plastic-Free July just before COVID, they were the deadly 10 or the dirty 10. The dirty dozen, that was what it was called. Thank you, Marika. The dirty dozen, and it included cotton buds and bottles, and they were, I can't remember the 10 of them, but the dirty dozen came to mind.
Cigarettes would definitely, or cigarette butts would definitely be there. Yeah, we find so many of those. And I think a lot of people don't know it's plastic. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and then there's a comment here from Tana Hewitt, who says individually wrapped sweets and chips, examples, Lays, is a major issue that they find.
So Tana is actually the researcher who does the work, so she would know. She's the best to ask. Thanks, Tana.
And then maybe one last question from Dr. Taylor. Surely micro and nanoplastics are by far the biggest threat, almost impossible to solve now.
Yeah, so they would be the biggest threat because of obviously the toxins and how many organisms are impacted by them, including humans. They've now been found in human tissue. The thing is, you can't remove microplastics from the environment. So let's try and remove the big stuff before it becomes the little stuff. So that's really why, especially I think in poorer countries like South Africa, let's concentrate on things like the big plastics, because that you can remove, it's easy. Microplastics, once it's out there, it's next to impossible to get out.
And then Johan, just add, I think in SA, our large corporates can learn from smaller retailers who actually make an effort to package sustainably. And I completely and utterly agree with you on that, Johan. That's very wonderful. So ladies and gentlemen, I think usually when Chris is here, he said we reached almost 25 people, 26 now. It's that time of the evening where I'm going to thank every single one of you, but especially Dani for your talk, your team that was all here, and the amazing work you do, and for the time you've given to be with us tonight. It's an absolute privilege to have you on. And then to everyone all over the globe, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Have a wonderful day or whatever you're going to do now. And see you next week, Thursday, Dani. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Aisha. Thanks, everyone.
I'll be in touch.